After one season with the New York Rangers, Jaroslav Halak is an impending unrestricted free agent. Will the Halak-ness Monster be back on Broadway, or will the Rangers choose to go in a different direction with a different backup goalie? We discuss all this and more. Going to talk about Halak, of course, and also some other options for the Rangers as it pertains to their backup goalie. All this and much more on today's episode of Locked On New York Rangers.
You're Locked On the New York Rangers, your daily podcast on the New York Rangers. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome back, Blueshirts fans, to episode number 842 of the Locked On New York Rangers podcast. I'm your host, John Chick. Just want to thank you guys, as always, for making Locked On New York Rangers your first listen every day. We are free and available on all platforms, including YouTube. And we are, of course, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And as we just discussed, basically just going to jump right into it here. Jaroslav Halak spends one season with the New York Rangers, and we are going to discuss the possibility of him being back with the Rangers. Should the Rangers look to bring him back? Can they afford to bring him back? Et cetera, et cetera. So again, just kind of jump right into it here. Jaroslav Halak just turned 38 years old in May. This past season with the Rangers, got off to a little bit of a tough start. I never thought that it was as bad as a lot of other people were claiming that it was, though. A lot of fans were pretty quick to write off Jaroslav Halak at the start of this past season, claiming that, he's too old, he can't do it anymore. There's the worst backup goalie the Rangers have ever had, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. If you go on Twitter, you could tell that a lot of things were said about Jaroslav Halak, and not a whole lot of them were all that positive. And, it was somewhat understandable because Halak lost his first 6 starts that he made with the Rangers. He gave up 3 or more goals in 5 of 6 of those starts. Although, on the flip side of that, there was only 1 game out of those 6 starts where he gave up any more than 3 goals. And then right after the 6-game losing streak, Halak turned his season around in a big way. He won his next game, lost the game after that, but then he reeled off 7 consecutive wins for the New York Rangers. So big time credit to Jaroslav Halak for sticking with it, not getting discouraged, hanging in there, and eventually getting his season turned around. That's got to be difficult to do. You never as a team want to be chasing your first win of the season for that long. And I think for a goalie, the same thing probably applies. You start, 0-2, 0-4, 0-6. It's like, my God, am I ever going to win a game here? But again, Jaroslav Halak, he's been around for a while. He probably understands there are some ebbs and flows and some ups and downs to this game, particularly at the goaltender position. He hung in there and ended up turning in a pretty nice season for the New York Rangers as their backup goalie. Concludes the season with 25 games played. 24 of those were starts, a record of 10, 9, and 5. So again, after starting the season with 6 straight losses, 1 was in overtime, so a record of 0-5-1 to start the season. Halak concludes the season with a run of 10 wins, 4 losses, and 4 overtime losses. Not too shabby for a veteran backup goalie. You just want your backup goalie to be able to give you a chance, and Halak mostly did that, save for the rough start to the season for the Rangers. Part of the reason why I never really thought that it was as much of a disaster, I think, as some other people may have thought, is just because early in the season, if you get lit up once or twice, which is basically what happened to Halak, I think there were 2 games where he really didn't have it, really struggled quite a bit. But when that happens early in the season, your goals against average is going to shoot through the roof. Your save percentage is basically going to be in the toilet. And that's, again, what we saw with Jaroslav Halak. But he ends up concluding the season, once again, on a 10-4-4 run, and ends up with a save percentage of .903 and a goals against average of .272 to go along with 1 shutout. Those are not spectacular numbers, but again, for your veteran backup goalie, I think you can live with it. As far as the possibility of the Rangers, bring him back for this upcoming season, the biggest concern to me about them doing that is the fact that he did just turn 38 years old. And when players start to get up there into their late 30s, you always kind of run the risk of them basically just kind of falling off of a cliff. I mean, it can happen any given season. It's happened to a lot of good players in the league. It gets to a point where, they just can't do it anymore. And, you want to avoid that if you can. You'd rather, I think, probably move on from somebody 1 year too early rather than 1 year too late. And I think, the fact that players can fall off at a certain point, probably even more true of the goalie position, such a physically and mentally demanding position, maybe the most in sports. You could certainly make that argument. So, the fact that he is getting up there, that does give me some pause. But you know what? He's been a solid goaltender throughout his career. And I feel like if he's willing to come back at a reasonable price, I would at least be open to it. I would imagine the Rangers probably would be as well. Seem to fit in there pretty nicely. Seem to be pretty well liked by his teammates, seem to get along with Igor Shesterkin pretty well. And like I said, the biggest thing for your backup goalie, you just want them to give you a chance anytime that they start. And Jaroslav Halak did that far more often than not. And, coming off of a fairly inexpensive deal, paid him, I believe it was $1.35 million for Jaroslav Halak this past season. And, that doesn't sound like a lot. It's really not that much. I think it might have actually been $1.5 million. It was somewhere in that ballpark. But bottom line, it was right around there, more than 1 million, less than 2 million. And it would probably be about the same price to keep Jaroslav Halak in the fold for next season. I can't imagine, once again, he's 38 years old. I don't think any team is going to offer him more than 1 year as far as his next contract is concerned. So from that point of view, the Rangers, I don't think they have to worry about anybody giving Halak a multi-year deal and him going to a team that does such a thing. Because again, at that age, I just got to believe that it's going to be 1 year at a time from Jaroslav Halak from now until whenever he decides to hang up the skates. But you know what? A lot of this is going to come down to Jaroslav Halak and what he wants and what he's looking for. Is he comfortable in the Northeast? We know in the past that he's played with the Islanders as well as the Bruins, and now, of course, with the Rangers. Does he like being on the Rangers? It seems like he embraced the backup role. Seemed like, again, he got along pretty well with his teammates in the locker room. And as I mentioned, him and Igor seem to have a nice rapport. Does he feel like he can win a Stanley Cup here? Because Jaroslav Halak, again, not getting any younger. You got to figure that one of the things that's keeping him going, and one of the reasons, at least one of the reasons, why he wants to keep playing and why he's continued to play for as long as he has, is the possibility of winning a Stanley Cup. And I think that kind of played into his decision to sign with the Rangers this past offseason. Will the same thing happen this offseason? Only time will tell there. And the other thing, very matter-of-fact question, does he want to keep playing? He hasn't said anything to my knowledge. I haven't seen anything about Jaroslav Halak considering retirement. And based on the season that he just had with the Rangers, he will have a job somewhere in the NHL next season if he wants to keep going. Bottom line, there's 32 teams. Pretty much all of them carry 2 goalies, 64 goalies. He's one of the 64 best, so he will once again have a job if he desires to have one. Is money the most important thing? Is he comfortable with the Rangers and in the Northeast? Does he want a chance to play on a contending team, a team that should be in the playoffs, and a team that could potentially win a Stanley Cup next season? If the answer is yes to all those questions, then it's possible that he sticks around with the Rangers. If I'm going to make a prediction on this as far as Yarrow being back with the Rangers, I'm leaning a little bit toward him probably walking at the end of this season, just because there is such a cap crunch with the New York Rangers right now. And we discussed this the other day, and a little bit of an update on something that we talked about. So salary cap right now for this season that's technically still ongoing. We got the Stanley Cup Finals underway right now. The salary cap was $82.5 million. For next season, going to be $83.5 million. That's the plan as of right now. And Gary Bettman, this is according to a couple of different tweets up here. LeBron was on this. He mentioned that right now Bettman is saying, or kind of alluding to the fact that the salary cap is only going to go up by $1 million. There was some hope, I guess, and some conjecture that it could go up by more than that. For what it's worth, the expectation now per Gary Bettman is that it will only go up $1 million, and then we'll see a more sizable jump the following offseason. And we'll see what happens there. Again, it's not always easy to project free agents and what's going to happen and who the Rangers can hang on to if we don't know for sure what the salary cap is going to be. But if we operate under the assumption that it will just be $83.5 million, backup goalie is a spot where the Rangers absolutely have to save as much money as they possibly can. The minimum salary next year is $775,000. And I can't imagine the Rangers are going to want to pay their goalie much more than that, because as we talked about recently as well, 14 players under contract right now, and they have $11 million in cap space, and they have to sign up to 9 players. It could be as few as, maybe 7. So that would give you a little bit more breathing room, but man, it's tight right now. And obviously the Rangers can make some trades to open up some cap space, but bottom line, having an expensive backup goalie is just not a luxury that the Rangers can afford. And so for Jaroslav Halak, if he gets like $1.5 million, it doesn't sound like that much, But for the backup goalie position for the Rangers right now, that is kind of a lot. And a lot of this, again, all the unrestricted free agents that the Rangers have, they all affect each other. If everybody else walks in free agency, then maybe there's a better chance that the Rangers can re-sign, Jaroslav Halak and keep him in town for this upcoming season. But time will tell there. And we also have to be, prepared for the fact that the Rangers might go in a different direction as far as backup goalie is concerned. And in just a second, I want to go ahead and talk about a couple of backup goalie options from around the league, some impending UFAs, some guys that the Rangers could look to bring into town next season if Jaroslav Halak, either retires or goes somewhere else in free agency, whatever the case might be. If Jaroslav Halak moves on next season and is no longer with the Rangers, we got some other options on the table here. I would love to have Halak back. I'm willing to take that risk as far as him being a little bit older. Obviously, he's not going to have that big of a workload given that he's backing up Igor Shesterkin. But we have to have a plan B and maybe even a plan C, and we're going to get to that in just a second. But first, we do have to let everybody know that today's episode of Locked On New York Rangers is brought to you by eBay Motors. For a championship team, it is all about making sure every player is a perfect fit. It's the same when it comes to your vehicle. Every part needs to fit just right. So the next time you need parts and accessories, head to eBay Motors. With eBay Guaranteed Fit, you can be sure every part you need fits right the first time around. Just add your ride to My Garage and look for the green check to know the part will fit or your money back. Because just like in sports, confidence is the name of the game when you shop on eBay Motors. And with over 122 million parts to choose from, you will be back in the game in no time. After all, it's easy to bring home a win when the right parts are guaranteed. Get the right parts, the right fit, and the right prices on ebaymotors.com. Let's ride. eBay Guaranteed Fit, only available to U.S. customers, eligible items only, and exclusions apply. All right, we just want to go ahead, keep everything rolling here, and thank you guys, as always, for making Locked On New York Rangers your first listen every day. We are free and available on all platforms. And for the everydayers, definitely stick around. It's early in the week. There's going to be a special Sunday edition here, but we are going to certainly be keeping an eye on the Rangers' search for the next head coach. Obviously, the news about that could drop any second, and we'll be all over it here on Locked On New York Rangers. Also going to be looking at other free agents, both the Rangers' own free agents and free agents from around the league that could be targets for the Rangers when free agency begins on July 1st. But for the time being, let's keep the focus on the backup goalie. And I want to throw out a couple of different names that I think could be options for the Rangers. I got three in particular, a couple of honorable mentions as well. I'm going to kind of do a top three here, and we'll start with my number three favorite, not including Jaroslav Halak. I'd like to have him back, as I mentioned. But as far as, free agents from around the league and other guys that could be a fit here, number three for me is going to be Jonathan Quick. He is now 37 years old, which really surprised me. I thought he was somewhere around like 34-ish, maybe 33, somewhere in that ballpark. But obviously, he's getting up there quite a bit himself. And the thing about Jonathan Quick, he is really fallen off in recent seasons. The past 5 seasons or so, he just has not been the same guy that won the Vezina, won multiple Stanley Cups. He did have a little bit of a resurgence 2 years ago with the Kings, a .259 goals against average and a .910 save percentage. But this past season really struggled between the Kings and the Vegas Golden Knights. Technically, with the Blue Jackets as well. He was there for all of one day, never actually played in a game with them, was traded there by the Kings. Blue Jackets immediately flip him to the Vegas Golden Knights. But for all intents and purposes, basically, he played for the Kings and the Knights this season. And between the two teams, and let me just warn you, these stats are ugly. They are not Jonathan Quick-like. 16, 15, and 6 with a .341 goals against average and a .822 save percentage. That is rough. And honestly, the goals against average and the save percentage, I'm trying to figure out how he even had more wins than regulation losses. That doesn't even sound possible with numbers like that. For what it's worth, he did play a little bit better for the Knights down the stretch than he had been playing for the Kings before that. And it's funny, he could actually end up winning his 3rd Stanley Cup because, the Stanley Cup is just underway as I'm recording this. In fact, Game 1 is happening right here, right now as we speak. But if he was going to win his 3rd Stanley Cup, he would do it as a goalie. He's currently backup goalie. He's currently backing up Adin Hill. And he's also finishing up a 10-year, $58 million contract. Pretty much goes without saying that his next contract is going to look quite a bit different from that one. The biggest reason, and honestly, it's close to being the only reason why I look at Jonathan Quick as maybe a good backup option for the Rangers next season, is the experience that he has, and in particular, the playoff experience that he obviously has as well. And look, no matter who the Ranger backup goalie is, we hope that he doesn't touch the ice a single time in the Stanley Cup playoffs, because obviously we want Igor Shesterkin to be playing well in the playoffs, and we want him to be doing his thing and obviously staying healthy. And, just like this past season, short playoff run, but we never saw Jaroslav Halak in a playoff game between the Rangers and the Devils. So we hope it's the same thing next year, regardless of who the backup goalie is. But if there is a worst case, god awful scenario where Igor Shesterkin gets injured or something like that, obviously knock on wood there. But if that does happen, you do want to have a backup goalie who you feel like can step in there and get the job done. And I realize Jonathan Quick has obviously fallen off in recent seasons. I think, the goals against average and the save percentage that I just read to you obviously indicates that. And again, just the last 5 years or so just has not been the same goalie. But if there was ever a time for Jonathan Quick to be able to just kind of wind back the clock a little bit and, kind of just be kind of like a last dance type of scenario, I would think that would be the scenario right there, a situation where he's kind of thrust into some playoff games and, has to take over and has to try to hold down the fort and has to try to go on one last deep playoff run. It might be a little bit far-fetched given his age and the way that his game has declined, but crazier things have happened, I would think, than Jonathan Quick, rediscovering maybe not prime Jonathan Quick type play, but at least, solid Jonathan Quick type play. And I think of all the backup goalies, they're going to be available. He's somebody that if something happened to him in the playoffs and I had to roll the dice with somebody, I might take Quick over pretty much anybody else that's available as a backup goalie this offseason. But, again, for his career in the postseason, Jonathan Quick, record of 49-43, a goals against average of 231, a save percentage of 921, and 10 shutouts. Incredibly impressive numbers. Also, the 2 Stanley Cups, of course. And again, I know a lot of that was a long time ago, but I would still roll the dice with him over a lot of the other backup goalie options. Once again, if he was forced into duty in the Stanley Cup playoffs. Another goalie that I want to cover here, we'll put him at number 2 as far as my rankings. As far as free agent goalies from around the league are concerned, I'm going to go with David Rittich. Rittich is still just 30 years old. In order, he has played for the Flames, Leafs, Predators, and the Jets. He's actually played for 4 different teams in the last 3 seasons. He was the top goalie with the Calgary Flames for 2 straight seasons in 2018-2019, as well as 2019-2020. And he also made the All-Star team in 2020. He had a really nice season for himself. Other than that, he's pretty much been a backup goalie throughout his career. But I do think he's a goalie that's been at least somewhat underrated pretty much for the duration of his career. 172 games for David Rittich, a record of 79, 51, and 21. So he has a winning record for his career, even if you lump the regulation losses together with the overtime losses, still a winning record. And somebody who seems to be comfortable moving around quite a bit because, as I just mentioned, 4 different teams in the last 3 seasons, seems to go out there and put up respectable numbers pretty much no matter where he plays. So he's getting to the point where he's kind of a journeyman playing with another team. It would be his, 5th team in the last 4 years. That doesn't seem like something that would affect him this past season. He was with the Winnipeg Jets, so he obviously was the clear-cut backup to Connor Hellebuyck, a Vezina finalist. He would also, in New York, obviously be the clear-cut backup to Igor Shesterkin, and that's also a role that, Rittich seems to do okay with. This past season, a solid year for him, 21 games, 9 wins, 8 losses, 1 overtime loss, a goals against average of 267, and a save percentage of 901. Fairly similar numbers in a lot of different ways to what we just went over with Jaroslav Halak. Few less games played, obviously, but, again, not Hall of Fame numbers, nothing that's going to jump off the screen, but those are acceptable numbers from a backup goalie. And the one thing that Rittich has going in his favor, if you want to kind of put him against Halak, is Rittich is quite a bit younger. As we mentioned, Halak just turned 38. David Rittich still just 30 years old. Something else that's encouraging here is that Riddick is coming off of a 1-year deal that paid him only $900,000. With the season that he just had, it was one of his better seasons in a while. So maybe he's in line for a little bit of a pay bump. Maybe at the age of just 30, he can find a multi-year deal somewhere out there. But if the Rangers can get him anywhere near that price, $900K, and preferably just one season, that's an option that they could certainly look to go with. Again, I think he's somebody that's mostly been underrated for his career. Not a perennial all-star, although he did make the one all-star team. Not a career Hall of Famer or anything like that, but somebody who, once again, the theme here, as a backup goalie, gives you a chance on any given night. He's usually going to keep you in the game, not embarrass himself or embarrass the team, or be one of those goalies who just, you put him in there and you just feel like you kind of have no chance. I don't think that would be the case with David Riddick. We'll see if the Rangers look to talk to him, look to go down that road, and if they can afford him. All questions that will be answered in due time here. Again, the Rangers cannot afford to spend big on their backup goalie, as we've documented here on this podcast. Going to keep everything rolling in just a second. Want to go over a couple of honorable mentions, just 2 quick honorable mentions. And then I'm also going to reveal my top choice. Again, if the Rangers go outside the organization for who the backup goalie for this team could be in this upcoming season. And we're going to do all that good stuff in just a second. All right, let's go ahead, keep everything rolling here. Want to go over the 2 honorable mentions. The 2 honorable mentions are the 2 in-house candidates for the Rangers, and that would, of course, be 31-year-old Louie Domingue and Dylan Garand, who's actually going to be turning 21 in just a couple of days here, both of whom played this past season exclusively with the Hartford Wolfpack. We'll start with Domingue. He signed a 2-year deal with the Rangers this past offseason at $775,000 per season. Once again, if the Rangers are just absolutely desperate to save every possible dollar that they could possibly save as it pertains to their backup goalie, then they already have somebody in place to take that role this upcoming season, and that would be Louie Domingue. Again, he makes the league minimum, so you're quite literally saving every single cent that you can possibly save on your backup goalie if you go with Louie Domingue. I do have some pause when it comes to Domingue, though, because if we're being honest, he just hasn't really had a whole lot of success in the NHL. As I mentioned, 31 years old, 142 games for Domingue, a goals against average in the NHL of .304 and a save percentage of .905. I guess you can live with that, if you feel like, once again, you have to save every possible dollar that you absolutely can when it comes to your backup goalie. I guess you can go with that. Domingue, not my top pick, but somebody that's at least an option. And I also get the feeling this is part of the reason why they gave him a 2-year deal this past offseason. Obviously, Halak was brought in. He only got the 1-year deal. And, if Halak is going to walk in free agency and the Rangers really need to save money, they at least have one guy in-house who they can plug into that role if need be. And we'll see if the Rangers look to go down that road. But for the Wolfpack this past season, a solid year for Domingue, record of 22, 12, and 8. Goals against average of .251 and a save percentage of .911 to go along with 4 shutouts. But again, just hasn't had a lot of success in the NHL and hasn't played a lot in the NHL either. Over the past 4 seasons combined, only 10 NHL game appearances for Louie Domingue. And in fact, 6 of them were with the Penguins when they lost to the Rangers in the playoffs 2 seasons ago. So, yeah, an option, but not the most exciting option. He's the option that, if you really want to save some money, save every dime that you possibly can, then maybe Louie Domingue becomes an option. Dylan Garand, the other Wolfpack goalie from this past season, he'd be a little bit more expensive because he'd be playing on his ELC, which $925K, so it's a little bit more. Garand has yet to make his NHL debut. Obviously, still very young, turning 21 in just a couple of days here. Former 4th-round pick by the Rangers in 2020. Put up some really strong numbers with the Kamloops Blazers of the WHL before going to the Hartford Wolfpack. He actually played 2 games with the Pack in 2020, 2021, and then 32 games this past season. You combine all those games together with Hartford, a record of 13, 15, and 3 there. Goals against average of .304, save percentage of just .892. Definitely worth noting that Dylan Garand killed it for the Wolfpack in the playoffs this past season. The Pack won 2 playoff rounds, and Garand played in 8 playoff games, a 5-3 record, a goals against average in the playoffs of .176, and a save percentage of .935 to go along with 2 shutouts. Small sample size, obviously, but very impressive that Garand was at his absolute best come playoff time for the Hartford Wolfpack. I would imagine the Rangers aren't going to strongly consider him, though. I would think they would want him to be the primary goalie with the Hartford Wolfpack. He's still very young, and they want to get him some more seasoning before they really look at him for the NHL. I don't think we see Dylan Garand, barring injury or anything like that, with the Rangers this upcoming season. But with no further ado, let's go ahead and get to the person that I believe is the Rangers' best option for backup goalie if they are to look outside their organization, and that is going to be 27 years old, Alex Nedeljkovic. I believe with Nedeljkovic, there's a little bit of untapped potential there. He's still very young, just 27 years old. So, somebody that can still have some good hockey in front of him, obviously. But this is someone who has had success in the NHL. One season in particular, he was absolutely outstanding with the Carolina Hurricanes. Was up for the Calder that year. I believe he was one of the finalists. And to just kind of run through his stats, he's played 4 seasons or parts of 4 seasons with the Hurricanes and parts of 2 seasons with the Detroit Red Wings. And we really need to look at the stats differently because it's basically a tale of 2 careers, what he did with the Canes versus what he did with the Red Wings. So to look at the Canes, and again, parts of 4 seasons there, the first 3 seasons, he only appeared in a total of 6 games. And then the 4th year, he appeared in 23 games. But to put all these games together, all 4 of these seasons together, 29 games with the Carolina Hurricanes. That includes 27 starts, a record of 17, 7, and 4, a save percentage of .928, and a goals against average of .201. Off to an outstanding start in his NHL career with the Carolina Hurricanes. Also had 3 shutouts in that time. Then he's traded to the Detroit Red Wings, and in 2 years with Detroit, it's kind of gone south for Nedeljkovic. 74 games, a record of 25, 31, and 11, a goals against average of .335, and a save percentage of .900 on the dot. And he actually ended up getting sent down to the AHL this past season. To me, sometimes we talk about buy low candidates when it comes to trades. That's where you really hear that phrase a lot. To me, this might be a little bit of a sign low candidate. To put it bluntly, the Canes, over the past, 5 years, however far you want to go back, they've been a very good team. It seems like they win the Metro every single season. They're always in the mix in the playoffs. And in that same time period, Detroit has obviously not been a very good team. They've gotten better over the last couple of years, but for the most part, they've obviously struggled in that time. And to me, that's probably part of the reason why his numbers were so much better with the Canes than they were to the Red Wings. Obviously, that's not the only factor, but he was surrounded by a much better team in Carolina than certainly he was in Detroit. And if you sort of average everything out, the stellar numbers that he put up with the Canes versus the weak numbers that he put up with the Red Wings, the truth probably lies somewhere in the middle. And the Rangers, they're a lot closer to the Canes, I would say, than they are to the Red Wings. So to me, this is somebody that if he's on a good team and, he's supported well by his teammates, I think this is somebody that can put up decent numbers as a backup goalie. And if you do kind of take the median numbers from what he did with the Canes and what he did with the Red Wings, I think he's going to put up the kind of numbers that you can certainly live with from your backup. Again, the theme here, backup goalie is somebody that gives you a chance to win. But with Nedeljkovic, he's not just a backup goalie that I believe would give the Rangers a chance to win. He's a backup goalie that actually has a little bit of upside. Again, just 27 years old and has had success in this league. And by the way, with the Rangers, the secret weapon, Benoit Allaire. You've got the Benoit Allaire effect. We've seen the work that he's done with everybody from Henrik Lundqvist to Igor Shesterkin, Alex Georgiev, Antti Ranta, Cam Talbot. The list goes on and on. Every goalie he works with seems to excel, do very well for themselves, and go on to have really nice careers. You give him a 27-year-old Alex Nedeljkovic, who has already had some success in this league, has fallen on some tough times. I think Benoit Allaire can work with somebody like that. So Nedeljkovic, by a pretty comfortable margin as far as, again, looking for goalies from outside the organization, he's at or near the top of my list. And in fact, yeah, he's at the top of my list. We're putting him at number 1 here. The issue with Nedeljkovic is how much he would cost because, he's coming off of a contract that paid him $3 million per season. And, it's possible that the rough seasons that he's had in Detroit, that could allow the Rangers to get him a little bit of a discount. But again, it goes back to the same thing that we've been talking about this entire episode, and that is that the Rangers cannot afford to splurge on a backup goalie. So if the cost is reasonable, if his cost is down, and again, he struggled quite a bit this past season. So if you can get him at a discount, I think that's somebody to take a look at if you're the Rangers as a backup goalie for this team. I figure we could pretty much call it there. The only other thing that I want to mention before we call it a day here, Brian Othman and the Peterborough Petes lose in the CHL Memorial Cup semifinal on Friday night. They were eliminated by the Seattle Thunderbirds, who defeated the Petes 4-1. Othman actually scored the only goal for the Petes in that game. He scored 2:41 into the third period. That cut his team's deficit to 2-1, but that was unfortunately as close as they would get, and they were eliminated. Othman in that game also a -1 and had 7 shots on goal, but can't wait to see what's next for Brian Othman. I think far and away the Ranger prospect with the most upside and maybe even the safest floor. I mean, I think in a worst case scenario, this is somebody that, in an absolute worst case scenario, this is somebody that can fill out your bottom six and play some tough physical hockey. In a best case scenario, I mean, he's the total package, plays with that physicality, and just becomes a heck of a player, a good offensive player in the NHL as well. But yeah, I figure we could pretty much call it there for today. Once again, if you guys would like to get in touch with this podcast, please send an email to lockedonnyrangers@gmail.com. Once again, that is lockedonnyrangers@gmail.com. And definitely give us a follow on Twitter as well, @LO_NY_Rangers. Once again, that's @LO_NY_Rangers. And definitely subscribe to Locked On New York Rangers YouTube channel. Thanks again, guys. I will see you next time.